I think low growth and high inflation is the path of least resistance over the next several decades. At the very least, low growth and poor prospects and falling wages for heritage Americans, for people who were born here or immigrated here the right way. Because a lot of the rise in the unemployment rate, even Jerome Powell said it, was a function of more people entering the labor force, migrants entering the labor force. So I think for people who lived here and have lived here will continue to be hollowed out by opportunists who move here solely for economic reasons, which has been the case for the last 50 years, the last 50, 60 years, but increasingly so in the last decade. That's going to continue getting worse. So I think, GDP will continue to be supported and GDP will probably continue being positive, but that consumption is going to come increasingly less from people who live here and pay taxes and do things the right way and raise families, and more from migrants who come here solely for economic purposes. This problem is accelerating. And that's why you've seen, even in Silicon Valley, most VCs are now avowedly backing Donald Trump, because even they see the problem here. Low skill, blue collar work, where Americans 100 years ago were able to support themselves off of that. A mechanic earned $20,000 annually in 1913, right around the time the Federal Reserve came into play, and an engineer earned $30,000. Not a big disparity between the two. In 2000, the median mechanic salary was something like $22,000 a year. An engineer's salary was closer to 70 or 80. So it's the gap between this causes the stratification in skill, in labor skill and income to widen out. Whereas previously, if you were a very skilled laborer or a non-skilled laborer, you could still support a family. Now that's not the case. If you were an unskilled laborer, you have to work several jobs in order to make ends meet, or be at the very top of whatever organization you're in order to make ends meet. And Americans are constantly being priced out of their low-skilled work by people who are coming to the country and willing to do it for far less. And so as the labor supply of unskilled laborers increases and the tax system remains complex, I think the wealthy will continue getting wealthier, and people who are unskilled and didn't really win in the IQ lottery, I suppose, it'll continue becoming harder for them. The problem is that policymakers do not care about low-skilled blue-collar workers. Unfortunately, they care about white-collar jobs and high-skilled jobs, doctors, engineers, lawyers. They care about making life better for them and not for the majority of Americans. You have to remember, whatever job you have, half of Americans, on average, half of Americans have a worse job. They have a worse salary, right? If you are earning like 100K, 110, 120K a year, you got to realize that, the median income in the United States is around $65,000. And so if you think $65,000 in Massachusetts, you're looking at like a 1-bedroom apartment in the suburbs in order to support yourself and maybe a spouse and maybe one kid if you could really stretch and make ends meet. So I think that's a really roundabout way of saying it's going to become harder, increasingly so, as we basically have an open border policy and this terrible fiscal problem where life becomes more expensive and harder for people who are doing things the right way in this country. And that will lead to more people feeling destitute and lost and forgotten. And it's just going to continue giving rise to people calling for things like ending the Fed and nationalism here in the United States, fully shutting down this globalist idea that human beings are fungible. So let's import all of the cheap labor that we can. I think that is the cultural zeitgeist that we're shifting to. That's what gave rise to Donald Trump in 2016, and it's giving rise to his potential re-election in 25 days here in 2024. So all of this is a very big problem, as average Americans' lives are made harder and worse by the constant influx of new workers who are willing to do their jobs cheaply. That's going to continue giving rise to really, really upset sentiment toward the powers that be. And so more inherent skepticism toward globalists, more inherent skepticism toward the elite. So I think growth will probably remain positive, but not positive because Americans' lives are better. Rather positive because we're importing a great deal of labor who's willing to undercut the wages and lifestyle of average Americans. So I think high inflation, persistent inflation, probably around, we're going to raise the inflation target formally or informally to 2.5% annually. That's where we are now, 2.5% to 3% annually. That's going to be the new normal. So the increase in prices is going to accelerate. It has accelerated, and it is at an accelerated pace compared to where we have been historically, 1.5% to 2%. And that's going to be the path of least resistance over the next several decades. I think GDP will probably remain positive. Economists will probably clink their champagne glasses together and say that we did it. We're accomplishing wonders. The United States has been in expansion mode for several decades. But over that period of time, life will become harder for people who live here and work here and support families. We have politicians that are increasingly abandoning the social contract and abandoning the people that they promised to work for in lieu of atomizing the idea of the individual. And basically saying that, look, you are as worthwhile to me as an American citizen, my constituent that voted for me and pays taxes and lets me do my job, as somebody who I'm going to import from Colombia, who's going to bring their whole family up here, jam 7 people into a 1-bedroom apartment and then undercut your wages and drive prices up and drive rent up because you are atomized now. I don't care about you. People are beginning to realize that and wake up. And again, like I said, I think that is where the cultural zeitgeist is headed. If the United States as the global leader cannot work for its citizens, well, who does it work for? And that is increasingly the question that many people are asking and many voters are asking. And one of the reasons why this election is so consequential is because if the rate of illegal migration continues on the route that it currently is, then there won't be any more swing states. We've seen a several hundred-fold increase in the amount of illegal migrants in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, all of the major swing states. And, as a result of that, if we have 4 more years of this, basically all bets are off for kind of this wholly democratic national regime. And we've seen that obviously neither side really works for their citizens as much as they used to. The idea that the politician you vote in will work for you is hogwash. It's total nonsense. They have special interests and lining their pockets is much more important to them. But Americans won't have a choice if we get 4 more years of this, of what we've experienced, let alone 8 more years of this. And so really, this is the last ditch effort for Americans to vote for the politician that is seemingly saying he's going to work for the American people and prioritize us. But yeah, no, it doesn't. It does threaten the United States' position on a global stage, I think, over a multi-decade time horizon, if politicians continue proving that they can't create a favorable environment for actual Americans, and they're more interested in padding their pockets and working for foreign interests rather than their own people. I think that's the biggest problem today. I think that is what is at stake in this election. And I certainly think that if we don't reverse course quickly, America will quickly lose its position as the place that everybody wants to move to. It's the land of opportunity. And, it will quickly become a shell of its former self. It certainly already is, but the path toward that is accelerating.
The government printing currency in this fiat world we live in of them continually trying to paper over everything, does that just make people not care eventually?
Yeah, bread and circuses, but we've seen the consequences of apathy. We've seen what kind of taking a neutral stance does. Now it's come to a head. Everything that I've talked about is basically we're at an inflection point where people are really beginning to care, but the problem is on the cusp of becoming insurmountable when it comes to the federal debt, when it comes to the pace of money printing, when it comes to the pace of price increases, when it comes to immigration. We are on the cusp of not being able to turn this thing around. And so now people are being forced to care. Apathy is a losing position, and taking the position that, everything's okay, I will let the government fix it for me. Those seeds are coming to harvest now, and we're seeing the net result of that. And so people are increasingly being forced to care. Over the last several decades, you can fire up YouTube and distract yourself all day. You can scroll on TikTok and distract yourself every day. It's become so easy to consume and distract yourself. But now the problem is becoming so big, people are realizing, I'm not going to be able to raise a family.
If you like that clip, then you definitely got to check out this next spicy clip. I think you're really going to like it. Come on, check it out. But if you want the full version, the full interview, check that out over here. Come on, do it. I'll see you in there.